History loves to repeat one cruel joke. It takes a simple object, grain, metal, a vegetable, and transforms it into the foundation of an entire civilization. And then, in a single moment, it takes that object away. And watches as human greed and ideology turn crisis into apocalypse. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. A mechanism repeating through centuries with the precision of clockwork. On history's chessboard, there are always players who stake everything on a single piece. Empires, nations, entire continents build their existence around a single resource, a single crop, a single bet. And when that bet collapses, a terrible truth reveals itself: the catastrophe is not created by nature. The catastrophe is created by man, who sees millions dying and chooses profit. Today we will trace this pattern through three historical epochs. We begin with a vegetable that Spaniards brought from the New World as a curiosity. This vegetable fed Europe. And then it killed 1 million people on an Emerald Isle, while ships laden with food departed its ports. We will see how the same formula repeated in the jungles of Bengal under the flag of the British Empire. And we will end where our time begins, at the borders of a new dependency. Welcome to the story of how a simple catalyst becomes a weapon of mass destruction. Welcome to the lesson of one vegetable. The year is 1845. Ireland. 8 million people on an island half the size of France. Population density that would be the envy of Europe's most crowded regions. How did this become possible? The answer lay underground. In potato tubers. When Spanish conquistadors brought the potato from the Andes in the 16th century, Europe treated it with suspicion. Strange, lumpy, growing in dirt, it seemed food for paupers and livestock. But the potato had one incredible property: from 1 acre of land, it yielded 4 times more calories than wheat. It grew on poor soils. It required minimal care. It was the perfect fuel for a demographic explosion. By the early 19th century, Irish peasants had built their lives around the potato with absolute, total dependency. The average Irish family consumed 5 to 6 kilograms of potatoes per day. Breakfast, potatoes with milk. Lunch, potatoes with salt. Dinner, potatoes with nothing. This was not a diet. This was a monoculture of human existence. British landlords observed this with cold calculation. Tenants feeding on potatoes could survive on tiny plots of land. This meant everything else: wheat, oats, barley, cattle, could be grown for export. To England. For profit. Ireland transformed into an agrarian province of empire. The island produced enough food to feed twice its population. But the Irish received only potatoes. Everything else left the island by water. September 1845. Farmers walk into their fields and freeze in horror. Potato leaves have blackened. Stems have rotted. When they dig up the tubers, they disintegrate in their hands into black, putrid mass. Phytophthora infestans. Late blight. A fungal disease that arrived on ships from North America. It spread with the speed of wildfire, destroying up to 90% of crops within weeks. 1 harvest failed. That was bad. 2 harvests in succession, that was catastrophe. 3 years, that was extinction. But here is the great irony: food existed. Grain grew. Cattle grazed in fields. Ports overflowed with food ready for shipment. In 1845, when the famine began, Ireland exported food worth more than £3 million. They could have stopped the exports. They could have opened the warehouses. They could have distributed grain among the dying. They did nothing. Charles Trevelyan. Assistant Secretary to the Treasury of the British Empire. The man in whose hands lay Ireland's fate. He looked at reports of mass starvation and saw not tragedy. He saw economic law in action. Trevelyan was an apostle of laissez-faire doctrine, the free market as supreme wisdom. Government intervention in the economy was sin. Famine, in his view, was natural correction of overpopulation. The mechanism of providence, as he called it. Divine cleansing of the island from excess population. The British government opened several soup kitchens for the poor. Allocated minimal aid. But with one condition: the Irish must work on public projects, building roads to nowhere, breaking stones, to earn their food. Even in famine's agony, Victorian morality demanded that paupers not receive free handouts. Meanwhile, ships continued leaving Irish ports. Laden with wheat, oats, butter, bacon. Under armed guard, because the starving tried to storm them. The result? 1 million dead. Another million fled across the ocean, in the holds of coffin ships, where many died from typhus and cholera before reaching America. Entire villages turned to ruins. The Irish language began to die. A culture that existed for 1,000 years was mowed down in 5. The most terrible part: this was not a natural disaster. This was a political decision disguised as economic doctrine. Lesson 1 is recorded: when a people depends on a single resource, and power is guided by ideology and profit, the catalyst transforms into a weapon. Food existed. People died. Between them stood doctrine. Move forward 1 century. Across half the world. To Bengal. The year is 1943. World War II incinerates the planet. On the far reaches of the British Empire, in a province where the Ganges River flows into the Bay of Bengal, 60 million people live. Bengal, India's breadbasket. Rice paddies stretch to the horizon. This is one of Asia's most fertile regions. But like the Irish a century earlier, Bengalis built their lives around monoculture. Rice. Only rice. And again, absolute dependency. British India operated on the same formula as Ireland. The local population fed on the staple crop. Everything else: export, taxes, military supply. Calcutta was one of Empire's most important ports. Food flowed from Bengal to feed British troops across Asia. The system was flawless. Until it broke. The year 1942. The Japanese Empire seizes Burma, India's main rice supplier. Sea routes to the Bay of Bengal become dangerous due to Japanese submarines. British command panics. What if the Japanese land in Bengal? A decision is made: scorched earth policy. All boats in coastal areas are destroyed or confiscated so the Japanese cannot use them. This paralyzes fishing and rice trade between regions. Simultaneously, the British Army begins requisitioning rice for military stockpiles, in case of invasion. The 1942 harvest was normal. Not magnificent, but sufficient. The problem was not nature. The problem was logistics and politics. Rice vanished from markets. Prices quadrupled. Peasants living harvest to harvest could not buy it. Warehouses were full, for the army, for export. But not for Bengalis. Winston Churchill, Britain's Prime Minister, receives telegrams pleading for help. India's viceroy begs him to send grain. Churchill's response? Why hasn't Gandhi died yet? He blames Indians for breeding like rabbits. Ships that could have brought grain from Australia, Canada, South Africa were redirected to create reserves in Europe, in case of famine after Greece's liberation. Bengal was not a priority. The result was apocalyptic. 2 to 4 million people died. Calcutta's streets were lined with corpses. Mothers sold children for a handful of rice. Entire families died in ditches. Photographs from that time show people transformed into skeletons wrapped in skin. Food existed. In provinces neighboring Bengal, harvests were normal. British Army warehouses overflowed with grain. But the administrative apparatus, bound by ideology and military priorities, did not allow redistribution. As in Ireland, this was famine created not by nature, but by politics. The investigating commission created after the war concluded, the famine was the result of policy and administrative failure, not food shortage. Lesson 2, a century passed. The continent changed. But the formula remained the same. Monoculture plus ideology plus power's priority over people equals mass death. And again, food was nearby while people died. Move to the present. Technologies changed. Ideologies acquired new names. But the pattern? It is more alive than ever. Take the modern food system. Today humanity depends on 3 crops, wheat, rice, and corn, for 60% of all calories. Monocultures occupy giant territories from Ukraine to Iowa. Genetically identical varieties, engineered for maximum yield. Sound familiar? Food globalization has created new vulnerability. When Russia blocks grain exports from Ukraine, it causes famine in Yemen and Ethiopia. When drought strikes California, almond prices soar worldwide. The system is so efficient that one failure triggers cascading effects across continents. And again, doctrine. Today it is not Victorian-era laissez-faire. It is neoliberal consensus: food is a commodity obeying the market. When prices soar, poor countries simply cannot buy food. Grain goes where they pay more. Not where people are dying. The years 2007 to 2008. Global food crisis. Grain prices doubled within months. The cause? A combination of droughts, rising oil prices, speculation on commodity markets, and using corn for biofuel production. The result: hunger riots in 37 countries. From Haiti to Egypt. Governments fell. The Arab Spring began partly because of bread prices. The year 2022. Russia's war against Ukraine blocks Black Sea ports. Tens of millions of tons of grain cannot leave Ukraine. Somalia declares famine. Egypt teeters on the brink of food crisis. The pattern repeats faster. Intervals between crises are shrinking. And here arises an uncomfortable question for modernity. What will happen when climate change truly strikes harvests? When droughts become the norm, not the exception? When India and China, 2 countries with 2.8 billion people, face water shortages for irrigation? We have food reserves. We have technologies. We have logistics. But we also have the ideology of profit maximization. We have national interests. We have geopolitical priorities over human lives. When crisis comes, what will governments choose? Feed the world or protect their markets? History has already given the answer. Twice. The pattern is crystal clear. Stage 1, dependency. Society builds its existence around a single resource, a vegetable, grain, technology. Stage 2, failure. Nature, war, or market destroys that resource. Stage 3, choice. Power faces a dilemma: save people or preserve the system, ideology, profit. Stage 4, reckoning. People die not from absence of resources, but from unwillingness to redistribute them. The Great Irish Famine. The Bengal Famine. 21st century food crises. Different epochs. Different continents. The same cruel formula. And now let us direct history's mirror at today. The modern world depends on supply chains stretched across oceans. On microchips manufactured on one island. On oil extracted in a few states. On food grown in monocultural zones. Every dependency is a potential vulnerability. Ukraine burns. Taiwan is under threat. Climate changes faster than forecasts. When the next crisis engulfs the planet, what will powers choose? Will ships with grain leave ports while millions die? Will technologies be distributed by market laws, not need? Will borders remain closed while surpluses accumulate inside? History does not repeat literally. But the patterns underlying human nature, greed, ideology, power's priority over compassion, these patterns are eternal. The potato was merely a catalyst. The real weapon was the system that preferred doctrine over human lives. And next time, when crisis comes, and it will come, the question will not be whether we have resources to save millions. Resources will exist. The question is whether the will exists to use them. History already knows the answer. It has seen it twice. And it patiently waits to see it again. Because history's most terrible lesson is that we never learn from history's lessons.